Your last sales call probably handed you your next most useful piece of content. You probably were asked a question and answer it and nodded thinking like, yeah, fair question, but then you never wrote it down. So when you went to write your next piece of content, you literally had to try and invent something new, which is very human to do, but also a bit daft because the buyer has already shown you where your message is doing too much heavy lifting. When a potential buyer says, so where would we actually start? Or how would we know if this is the right fit for our business? Or we tried something similar before and it didn't really work. And that last one, that one can make your stomach do a little cartwheel, but it's incredibly useful because that sentence in and of itself is a signal. It tells you the exact part of your marketing that needs more work before someone gets on a next sales call. And that's where this is going to get commercial because a buyer's question is rarely just a question. It usually tells you which part of your message that they can't figure out well enough on their own. And in B2B, that's so important because your buyer usually has to go and explain whatever your message was to somebody else, right? Technical B2B consultants usually have more than enough expertise. You've got client examples, you've got strong opinions, you've got lessons from delivery that could probably fuel 6 months of content if somebody locked you in a room with a coffee and a decent microphone. The risk sits in the transfer. And by transfer, I'm talking about knowledge transfer because a buyer reads your posts, they might like it, they might nod along while reading it, and then they have to go and explain what you do and who you are to their CFO or a co-founder, a procurement lead, or the person who's going to ask the horrible, sensible questions. And suddenly your clever positioning becomes, it's sort of a strategy and systems and maybe automation. But the problem there is nobody buys sort of. And in a pipeline that runs on referrals and proposals, sort of isn't just going to slow down these buyers' decisions. It's probably going to lose that sale for you in that second conversation, not in the first one, because the first person felt your energy. They got the vibe off of you. But when they go to take and translate that and do that knowledge transfer onto the second person, that's where things might start to come across or be communicated a little bit fuzzy. And when the next step feels fuzzy, the next person who's the sensible buyer, the decision is going to slow down. It's probably not going to go ahead. Or when the risk feels too big, or when they ask for more information instead of making a decision. So when you think about it, then your content has another job entirely. It needs to help the buyer be able to repeat the right thing when you're not there to be able to repeat it for them. So instead of treating those questions that show up on your sales calls as admin, use them as market feedback because they're showing you where decisions are slowing down in your buyer journey. And I call those buyer signals. Buyer signals are repeated questions, phrases, objections, and hesitations that show you where buying decisions are slowing down. You'll hear them in those sales calls, maybe even in your DMs, email replies when you send out a proposal. They might even come from a proposal feedback. They could come from referral conversations and the mildly terrifying moments where someone describes your work back to you and only gets it about 60% right. You know what I'm talking about. And where these decisions snag, there are 3 signal types worth paying attention to, and those 3 are curiosity, confusion, and resistance. Now, urgency matters too, but I want you to treat that as a timing marker because it tells you how hot the lead actually is. So let's go through these. Signal 1, curiosity. The first signal is the easiest to miss because it sounds harmless enough. Curiosity usually arrives like a very reasonably posed question. So a curious buyer might ask something like, so how does this actually work? Or what happens inside the process? What would we do first? And that buyer who asks a question like that, they just need a really simple explanation. You don't need to go and create any sort of 9-part diagram that looks like it belongs in NASA, right? Just a clear enough answer that they can picture the first step. So for example, if you help companies automate internal workflows and people keep asking, how does it start? Like what would be the first thing that we'd do? Don't go and create another post about the future of automation. Instead, create something more along the lines of what happens in the first week of a workflow automation project, or the 3 things I check before I recommend automating anything. that content then does the job that curiosity needs. It makes the unknown less foggy. Signal 2, confusion. So once the process is clearer, the next snag is usually category. The buyer is trying to work out where you fit, what they're comparing you with, and how to explain the difference without sounding vague. So a confused buyer asks, what's the difference between this and hiring an agency? Or is this strategy or implementation? How do we know what to fix first? So this buyer needs a comparison or some sort of a decision filter. They're literally trying to place you into a category. Now, Daniel Kahneman's research on cognitive ease shows that the brain uses ease of processing as a shortcut for trust. So when a buyer can't fit you into a familiar category quickly, the brain doesn't just file you as interesting, it thinks red alert, this is higher risk. And higher risk decisions get delayed, not made. So if you don't give them the category, their brain will borrow one. They'll put you down as a consultant, whatever you are, an agency, coach, fractional advisor, whatever. So be conscious of what that looks like. Signal 3, resistance. This is a heavier signal because this one has a little bit more history behind it as well. Resistance rarely shows up as, I don't trust you. It usually sounds much more reasonable than that. So a resistant buyer might say something like, we've tried something like this before, or the team won't use it, so it'll become a waste of money. Or we don't have time for a big project like that. Or we spent money on this already. So a resistant buyer needs proof, but with a little bit of respect baked in. I would say a lot of respect baked in, actually, because we tried this before usually means there's a bruise under that sentence. Maybe they bought the wrong thing, or they chose somebody who was all talk and no delivery. Maybe the implementation was super messy, or maybe something shifted inside their organization or company halfway through. So the content needs to show what changes this time, and a good response asset could be something like why automation projects fail after the tool is chosen, or the handover step most workflow projects skip, or what I check when a team has already been burned by automation. So the job is to help them feel safer without pretending that their concerns are in any way silly. So big brands do a version of this too. They look for the tiny moments where people are already frustrated, hesitating, or working around a problem. Let me tell you about a new one that's come out recently from a big brand, Heinz. Heinz, you know, the ketchup and the mayo and stuff. Well, people had accepted this tiny problem. When you get a McDonald's fries, right? Think large fries in their red little container. But if you're on the go and you've got your ketchup pot in one hand, your fries here, you don't have enough hands, right? Now, don't worry, this is something to do with service businesses too. But Heinz literally made the dipper. It's a new fry box which has space for your ketchup or your mayo. It's simple, it's practical, it's totally obvious when someone does it, but that's the point. They read the small friction properly. So for you, for consultant, the friction usually arrives as a sentence. We don't know where to begin, or we're unsure that the team is ready, or we've been burned before, those ones. Your version won't usually be a product idea. It'll just be a sentence. So much easier to create. The question someone asks that second or third time, the objection that keeps appearing in proposals, the phrase a referral partner keeps getting slightly wrong. The signal log, I'm going to share with you what that is. It's nothing elaborate. It's simply like a note on your phone. That's fine. Notion document, a Google document, wherever you're going to capture something and repeatedly go back to it. And there's 4 things I want you to capture. The exact sentence that somebody says in one of those places where you get buyer signals, I want you to capture the exact sentence, the signal type, the urgency marker, and the type of response asset that you could create in your content or in your replies back to these people. So for the sentence, write what they actually said. So if they said, we're drowning in manual work, use that. Don't translate it into operational inefficiency across internal processes, because nobody says that while they're making dinner and having a chat with their spouse, right? So for the signal type, mark curiosity, confusion, or resistance. For the urgency, listen for the timing language. Do they want this done yesterday, this quarter, before the new system launches soon, whatever that looks like. Then choose the smallest useful asset, a LinkedIn post, a short 90-second video, a proposal paragraph, a warm lead email. Maybe it's something you bake into your sales pitch, or maybe it's a short Loom or Zoom clip or something that you send after a call. Small is fine. That's all it needs to be. Useful is going to beat impressive every day of the week. So before I move on, I would love for you to reflect on this. Like, when was the last time you went back through your call notes, specifically looking for buyer language? Because most people I've worked with have never done this, at least not intentionally. And when you go through it, you'll learn so much about where your gap actually is in your messaging. Once you've captured the signals, the next thing to do is to figure out where to place them, because the best answer in the wrong place is still going to leave people stuck. So the placement depends on where the signal appears. If people ask a question publicly, answer it publicly. If they ask it in an email, well, then build it into your nurture email sequence or somewhere like that. Even when somebody books a call, if you know that these are the questions that come up, you could say, preempting some questions you might have, and here you go, and send them before your call happens. If it comes up from proposals, add it into the proposal. If it shows in your sales call, use it in the opener maybe and overcome it early on. And I want you to be really thinking about the different types of friction, because if you have 4 potential buyers asking, where do we start if we go ahead with this? Well, then make that first step visible before the sales call. If 3 buyers compare you with the wrong option, make the comparison easier. If 2 people say, oh, I've tried it before, show them what went wrong last time and what needs to be true this time for it to work exceptionally well. That's how content gets closer to revenue. It removes the repeated explanation from the call so the conversation can move to the real decision. Now, the 2 places where I see people tend to make mistakes with this, they either overvalue visible engagement or they leave useful buyer language sitting in those old notes and then they'll never go back to it again. Don't do that. Even set a reminder on your phone so that you can go back to it repeatedly. Update it at the end of the week with whatever is cropped up in your sales calls and your content, and just spend 10 minutes being strategic with capturing that, because that is literally your content bank going forward. So yeah, trap 1 is treating engagement as intent. A post can get attention for sure because it sounds interesting, but buying intent sounds more specific. Like, how much change would this require in my business? Or what needs to be true in my business before we will go ahead and start with this? What happens if we delay by a month or by a year? And who might need to be involved from the business? Those questions sit closer to money rather than just likes and impressions and that kind of thing on social media. And yes, likes are useful feedback, but buyer language is so much better for you, right? Trap 2 is letting signals go stale. So a signal has timing attached. If 4 prospects ask the same question this month, well, then don't wait until this month next year before you answer it, because waiting that length of time turns your stuff into, like, I don't know, a mummy in a museum exhibit, right? Lovely to look at, but commercially completely and utterly fucking useless. So keep the rhythm small enough that you'll actually do it at least once a week. And that weekly rhythm, it's simpler than you think. Once a week, like I say, open your recent conversations, your call notes, your recent DMs, anywhere buyers have said something in their own words. Find one repeated buyer sentence and mark it as curiosity, confusion, or resistance, and circle any urgency language. And then create that one response asset. Just one. You don't need a huge campaign or a 40-page content system, just one useful answer in the right place. And most consultants I work with, they make content so much harder than it needs to be. You're already answering the questions. The work is to stop making the buyer wait for a call to hear those answers. And you can start without building anything complicated. Use the conversations you're already having or have had. And if you want to make this super practical, I've linked a short quiz below. It'll help you spot where your content is currently leaking buying interest, because different problems need different fixes. Sometimes your content is attracting attention, but people still don't understand the first step. And sometimes they understand the idea, but they're comparing you with the wrong option. Sometimes they're interested, but there's an old objection sitting under the surface that your content just hasn't dealt with yet. And so the quiz is going to show your next smartest move to be able to scale, and whether it's positioning to get your foundation of your messaging right or something else, it's going to help you with moving that forward. So take it after this video and then go back through your last 10 comments, DMs, calls, questions, or emails with that result in mind. You will see the pattern faster. So your next useful content idea might already be sitting in your last sales call notes. So find the part of your content that needs tightening and then use the buyer's actual words to build the next post, email, video, whatever piece of content you're creating. That next sales conversation should open and potentially lead to a decision there and then on the call, because the buyer already told you what needs to be clearer. You've probably got it written down somewhere from last week. Go and apply it now.